We begin with breaking news this hour. The Teamsters Union says it will be heading back to the bargaining table in a couple of hours in an effort to head off a potentially crippling stoppage at the country's two big rail companies. Canadian National and Canadian Pacific Kansas City shut down operations at midnight Eastern Time in an unprecedented double hammer blow for Canada's economy and the supply chain. These simultaneous lockouts have slammed the brakes on the movement of freight, disrupting shipment across the country. Let's take a look at some pictures from just moments ago of Teamsters members on a picket line in Montreal. Almost every Canadian could be touched by this work stoppage. Agriculture, mining, and retail are just a few of the industries dependent on freight trains. And the lockouts won't just affect Canada. CN has tracks running to the Gulf of Mexico, while CPKC has lines that extend all the way to Mexican ports as well. Both the companies and the union released statements saying they have made generous concessions while accusing the other side of not negotiating in good faith. And we have team coverage for you this morning on this breaking story. Brett Ruskin is in Halifax with the impact on Canada's economy and on you. Janice McGregor is watching for the government's next move. She's in Ottawa. And Megan Fitzpatrick is at Union Station in Toronto with some of the commuter chaos caused by all of this. But let's start with Brett in Halifax. Brett, can you break down for us what does all of this mean for Canadians and the goods that they rely on?
Jacqueline, widespread impacts. And so let me try to break down kind of by categories what types of things are impacted. So we're going to look at Fords, food, farmers, and faucets. So let's start with Ford. So one of the vehicles that is typically loaded into the trains you see behind me right here. These are car carrying trains that are loaded up with cars with ships like the one that just kind of pulled up in the last hour or so. I've seen a Ford Bronco Sports in silver and black. If you're waiting for a Ford Bronco Sport in silver and black, your car is here. It is not at your dealership. It won't be there for a while because it's not being loaded. It's not being trained to where you need to be. So that's the case for those specific cars, but also cars coming from overseas, specifically kind of German cars, so Volkswagens, BMWs, Mercedes-Benz. Those are typically the cars that we see coming to this port in that way. So that's the first F. The second F is food, affecting more people than just Ford drivers. We are looking at some perishable items that haven't been loaded onto, that have been kind of held at their point of origin as opposed to being loaded onto and risking having them go bad on these train cars. So we're going to see perhaps some shortages of some items at some stores, everything from bananas to even frozen French fries. Speaking of food, if we expand out to the next F, which is farmers, we are entering harvest season for many grains, many crops in many parts of the country. They rely on trains to move their product to food processors. They can't really store the product once it's off the field, so problems there indeed. And finally, faucets. We're talking about tap water because chlorine is used by many municipalities across the country to ensure that tap water is safe to drink, to make sure that it's clean and safe. The thing about chlorine is that there are regulations around how much of it you can have in one place, how much your municipality can store, and it's difficult to transport in large quantities via truck or via ship. It relies on rail, and so industry experts are saying that we might see boil water advisories in the coming weeks if this rail stoppage continues and municipalities are not able to get the supply of chlorine that they require. So lots of different impacts from this rail stoppage.
Brett, also, we talk about the consumer and your sort of average Canadian, the impact there, but a lot of Canadians own businesses, big and small, across industries. Like you mentioned, the different types of sectors that could be impacted by this because rail is such an integral part of the supply chain. What more have we been hearing from the business community, from some of those business groups that represent business owners across the country?
Sure. Well, we recently heard from the president of the CFIB, the Canadian Federation for Independent Business, talking about, many different businesses affected by this rail stoppage. Specifically, the example that he mentioned was furniture manufacturers and furniture retailers. Here's what he had to say about that.
I've had examples from members of CFIB, small business owners, that sell furniture, that manufacture furniture, both saying that they're not going to be able to continue to operate. The furniture retailers saying that they're going to lose customers and people expect refunds because their furniture won't be there. And those that manufacture it saying that they're going to run out of parts very quickly because things will be stuck on the rails. And as a result, they're going to have to essentially freeze operations.
And so those frozen operations, something that is affecting all kinds of different industries across the country already. Jacqueline. Yeah,
this might be taking people back to COVID times here, Brett, when they're ordering furniture and it was going to take months to get there or whatnot. We'll see just how long any possible delays end up being, depending on how long this lasts. But thanks so much for kicking things off for us, Brett. That is Brett Ruskin in Halifax. Let's go to Janice McGregor now in Ottawa, because Janice, we just heard from the union regarding the intention to head back to the bargaining table in a couple of hours here.
Yeah, talks have not broken off. We need to be really clear about this. There's two different bargaining tables, one in Montreal with CN, the other one in Calgary with CPKC. Just because they hit that midnight deadline and the lockout started does not mean that they are not still exchanging offers and working back and forth. Federal mediators have been on the job working with them, trying to sort this out and remain there, trying to get a deal. Nevertheless, in some overnight statements, it was clear that they were also moving to a phase where they were going to start negotiating in the media as well. Why do I say that? Well, let's look at the sorts of things they're now revealing. CN, for example, put out some average salary data for conductors, for engineers, showing Canadians how these are employees that already make six-figure salaries even before their latest kind of enhanced wage offer that they apparently presented last evening. They say the offer they tried to avoid this lockout by putting to the union also was offering predictable schedules for them. It said it lined up with new rules that the federal government brought in about mandatory rest periods to make sure everything was safe. But CN says the union did not respond. We have a statement from CN here talking about how it feels it's negotiated in good faith over the last 9 months, that it continuously proposed serious offers with better pay, improved rest, and then criticized the Teamsters for not showing a desire to reach a deal. In Calgary, we also had a statement kind of summing up where things are at for CPKC. It too presented an enhanced final offer last night. It says its wage increases exceed inflation and it's not asking for anything that would compromise safety. Here's concretely a little bit of what their statement said. Both of these quite long statements, I should say. KPKC says it's bargained in good faith, but despite the best efforts, it's clear that a negotiated outcome is not within reach. Says the union leadership continues to make unrealistic demands that are going to fundamentally impair the ability to serve customers with reliable and cost-competitive service. So what's the union saying? It, too, was out with a really long statement last night. I think you already have a bit of the sense of the tone, but they are blaming the railways for this work stoppage. They say none of their offers are being seriously considered by the other side. Their statement really emphasizing specifically Paul Bouchard, the president, how the railways have shown themselves willing to compromise rail safety and tear families apart to earn an extra buck. Fighting words there, accusing them of not caring about all these people affected and having a sole focus on the bottom line. These are profitable companies, of course. Workers heading to the picket line, heading to sort of protests outside their offices. The only thing both of them seem to agree on in terms of what they're revealing about these talks overnight is how far apart they are.
Janice, we heard from Brett there talking about some of the reaction from business groups in the country. We've also heard from some of those business groups about their desire for the federal government to intervene here. Can you break down what we know about what the federal government could do here, or what it's signaling, whether it could or wouldn't do anything here, Janice? It's a bit of there's a bit of a question mark hanging over this still.
Yeah, absolutely. And the timing matters because this is August. Parliament is not sitting, so the MPs aren't handy to quickly bring in back-to-work legislation and wrap this up quickly. The railways want this dealt with now because they have a big, busy peak season of fall shipping ahead for things like grain shipments and so on. So if you're Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon, what do you do? He has been talking with premiers, including Danielle Smith yesterday when he was in Calgary meeting with the railway. He spoke to Scott Moe over the phone. He was talking to the Labour ministers for Ontario and Quebec. Obviously, very difficult for politicians when collective bargaining isn't getting to results. But Stephen McKinnon on Power and Politics last night, speaking to our colleagues, was not really tipping his hand about what's going to come next.
I'm not going to get into what ifs. The parties have to understand one thing very clearly, that it is in their hands, that the stakes are high, that Canadians are counting on them, that businesses are counting on them, that unionized Canadian workers and other workplaces are counting on them, commuters are counting on them, farmers are counting on them. These people need to understand very, very clearly that it is their duty to get a deal.
Let's be clear about the politics, though. All of them competing for the votes of unionized workers right now, inclined then to uphold collective bargaining rather than impose a deal through arbitration. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland, though, yesterday was using words like sabotage and self-harm to describe what something like this does to Canada's economic recovery. We'll see how patient the Liberal government is prepared to be here.
Okay, well, we will be watching for any further response from any, members of the government today. Janice, thank you so much. It's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. So we have heard about the broader economic impact here, the potential for it because of this shutdown and the pressure on the government to respond. But for thousands of people across the country, this big national story has suddenly become very personal as crucial commuter lines that share tracks with the freight companies shut down as well. And Megan Fitzpatrick joins us now from Union Station for more on this angle to things. Megan, how are commuters in the Greater Toronto Area being affected by the rail shutdown this morning?
Well, there's two key impacts for commuters in the Greater Toronto Area, for people trying to get into the downtown core where we are at Union Station. The entire Milton train line is closed because of this labor dispute. And so people that live in the city of Mississauga, for example, to the west of Toronto, who rely on that line to get into Toronto, have to find an alternative this morning. Metrolinx, the agency that operates GO Transit, saying they can head to the other surrounding lines like the Kitchener line or the Lakeshore West line to the north and the south of those lines to try and get into downtown Toronto. The other key impact is that the Hamilton GO station is also shut down. So people who take the Lakeshore West line can't board the train at the Hamilton station. The rest of the line is open in the rest of the station. So the alternative involves going to the West Harbour station, which is pretty close to the other Hamilton station, or traveling a bit further to Burlington to the Aldershot station. The buses are still operating as normal between Hamilton and Toronto, so that's the alternative as well. Instead of the train that people might usually take, they might have to hop on a bus or take their own car if they have one to drive into downtown Toronto. Up Express, the train that goes between Pearson Airport and Union Station, not affected. So air travelers who might be coming in and out of Toronto today should be aware of that. No disruption to that service. I spoke to commuters here yesterday, Jacqueline, who were saying maybe they would work from home today if they couldn't get into downtown Toronto. They're on their usual routes. We have a colleague out at Dixie Station on the Milton line, and Clara Pasica has been meeting commuters this morning, showing up there not knowing that the line was closed. They had not heard about the potential for the disruption, and so now they're scrambling, she said, to drive. There's a parking lot there. They're driving now to other nearby stations to try and catch a train to get to work on time. She said some people are calling their bosses, letting them know they might be late this morning.
Yeah, geez, that could be quite a delay for some people trying to find an alternative route, especially if there are many people trying to do the same thing at the same time, Megan. It's not limited to Toronto either. The impact here, a train service in Vancouver and Montreal is also being disrupted. So what do travelers in those cities need to know?
Yeah, for people watching in Vancouver who might normally take the West Coast Express to get into downtown Vancouver, it will not be operating today. That's the line that operates between Mission and Vancouver with stops in Port Coquitlam and other communities along the way. They use the same tracks, and so they can't operate today. TransLink is saying that there will be supplemental bus service along those routes to try and get people where they need to go. In Montreal, similarly, there's some disruptions there as well for commuters who rely on the EXO trains. There are 3 routes that are affected. The 11, 12, and 14 routes won't be operating today, and there will be free shuttle buses. That was the contingency plan to cover parts of the service that will be impacted by the lack of train service, but they have warned as well, Jacqueline, that all these buses are not going to make up for the usual volume that the trains can handle. So we're talking about thousands of commuters impacted here. In Vancouver, for example, I should have mentioned more than 3,000 people a day rely on that West Coast Express. Here in Toronto, we know more than 7,000 people a day take that Milton line. So there's going to be likely a lot of frustrated commuters today.
Yeah, no doubt, Megan. Thanks so much for this. That's Megan Fitzpatrick at Union Station in Toronto.